Sahana vavatu, Sahana punaktu, Saha viryam karavavahe, Tejasvinavaditam mastu ma vidvishavai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May we work together with great energy. May our study be illumined. May we not unnecessarily argue with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. So there's a question when Sri Ramakrishna Paramahansa uses the word, the catchphrase Kama-Kanchana, that is women in gold, what is he meaning? And of course, if we have an unfortunate interpretation, we'll find ourselves falling foul of political correctness. So I was pointing out that any good teacher will use convenient catchphrases in order to fire up our imagination and our sense of humor too. And this statement of literally women in gold was applied to men, but equally in women, men in gold was mentioned. And I was saying how we have within us, within our human nature, a biological side. Most people feel that they are biological beings. Now, the whole purpose of our spiritual study and the whole purpose of our life is to get a spiritual knowledge and awareness about our own true nature. And it's in the awakening of the soul and the transformation of life itself. Without the transformational aspect of this life, any spiritual endeavor seems to be hollow and shallow. So there must be some advantage in leading a spiritual life. And if we purely restrict ourselves to biological conditions, then these can range from highly unsophisticated and brutal, something more akin to animals, to the most highly sophisticated, where joy is found in the more cultural things, music, dance, poetry, and also investigations into critical thinking, scientific analysis and investigation. So there's a whole range of possibilities within the human scope, but all of them really will involve a kind of life which doesn't have any transformational value. You might say that discoveries in science can transform our lives. That would be perfectly true, but it doesn't transform our personal lives in terms of our daily problems and difficulties. And supposing you say life is extremely smooth, well, the biggest difficulty and the biggest source of grief will be bereavement. Somebody close to us dies. And so for this reason, the whole of spiritual knowledge, as espoused, say, in the Upanishads, and as espoused with every wise teacher, will be to highlight the fact of our mortality. And that becomes something of an issue for everybody, because we are striving to maintain our mortal life. We don't wish to die, even though the inevitable will naturally happen. And I suppose the closer you get to the borderline of death by advancing age, the more it becomes an issue. And even then, there's a kind of almost denial, a sense that life should be perpetuated forever. I always remember, you see, there was an interview with somebody who was maybe 130, one of the longest members of the human race surviving that long in contemporary human memory. And on being interviewed, so what is the secret of your long life? And after saying the usual things about, well, I never smoked, I never drank, I led a content life, I had a good diet and so on. But above all, there's only one thing above everything else. Well, what was that? I canceled my booking on the Titanic. So we can deal with these things with a certain sense of humor, By the age of 130, I presume we accept the inevitable. You'd be a fool not to. Even by the age of, let's say, 80 something or 90, you'd need to accept the inevitable. So the idea of dealing with mortality and immortality is a key issue in all spiritual literature, in all scriptures. So how to gain more immortality? Now you see, we know how to sustain mortality, and there are two genetic directives within us and every other species, biological species, even in bacteria. And that is that we want to survive above everything else. And the evolutionary theory of, say, Charles Darwin highlights this survival of the fittest. And so we have a drive to not only perpetuate our existing life, but future generations of it. And therefore, every species multiplies, every species has a procreation of some kind, even if it is a cell splitting itself. That kind of arrangement in single cell organisms will find it. Now, there's a remarkable thing about organic cells. It is very difficult to argue that they are anything except intelligent. And recent studies derived from physiology have shown from a wonderful, wonderful scientist, Barbara McClintock, who died in the 1990s. But she discovered in corn something that was called jumping genes. She discovered that adaptations to the environment is perpetuated in the development and the inheritance of any organic species, such as corn, for generation after generation. And she was ridiculed. And unfortunately, for about 10 years, she was ridiculed until it was discovered through studies of the genome. This is exactly correct. And she was awarded a Nobel Prize. After that, she was taken quite seriously. Now, one of the reasons why she was ridiculed was no doubt because of a male-dominated fraternity in the scientific area that didn't regard women in a very serious way. It was anti-feminist inherently, and fortunately, that kind of bias has largely gone and is continuing to go, and it still remains in developing countries, but I'm pretty sure that as time goes on, that also will go. Swami Vivekananda was very adamant to say that when women are treated with great respect as the goddesses that they are, I'm not quoting literally, I'm making a summary. So when a country such as India, for example, we can include parts of countries within Africa and South America and various other places, when they uplift the status of women, then your whole country will be wealthy, will be successful, and be uplifted and so on. Because it is the feminine aspect that yoga philosophy has taken and to represent the whole of what we call nature. Nature is feminine in most cultures. And so we refer to Mother Earth. Now, this different, better regard for women is inherent in Ramakrishna's thinking and his teaching. So when he says women and gold, he's not making an anti-feminist statement. He's not denigrating women. What he's doing is he's addressing this biological nature that says that as long as our sphere of interest is only in perpetuation of the species and survival through making sure that we eat, that we breathe, that we sustain our life as long as we possibly can. When this happens, then we are simply within a very limited sphere of understanding, and then it leads to a kind of approach to life which produces more pain than anything else, even though we're seeking a way out of the pain and we are seeking to avoid pain. We're actually diving into it because the source of the happiness that we're looking for is limited and won't last. It's only a temporary thing. And as I said many times before, when we say, I'm happy, it means at the moment, my bank balance is fine. At the moment, my children are well behaved. At the moment, I don't have arthritis on my knee, and so on. And so what happens when any of these factors get upset just momentarily, then we cease to be happy. We're now in a depressed mood. And that can happen extremely quickly if we're not careful. And if we don't have some replacement formula to deal with it, we're in trouble. And so spirituality and spiritual life gives us a new direction because it gives us a different way of evaluating things. Instead of evaluating the world as simply an area where we act and react within a small sphere of self-interest, we will not really find the deepest meanings in life, and we will not manifest this divinity from within, to quote Swami Vivekananda, but we will be no better really, only a sophisticated version of any other creature that is looking to survive at all costs by using these two genetic directives, namely this propagation of the species on the one hand, and eating and drinking, what we can describe as streaming negative entropy on oneself. What does this mean? It means that the world is moving toward chaos. If you understand what entropy means, entropy is a measure, you can say, of scrambledness. If you take an egg and you drop it on the floor, you can't recreate its original condition. It won't suddenly reverse like a movie and go back to its original form. So the scrambledness is called entropy, and therefore it goes from something extremely simple and unmixed to something that is more scrambled and mixed. And if you say that, what about human life? Well, the scrambledness, one of the evidences of scrambledness would be death. But you see, we are making every effort to stream negative entropy, in other words, order, into ourselves. And so we have this remarkable capacity to create order from chaos. The food that we all eat is produced in a highly complex and sophisticated way and requires the energy of the sun. And it has nothing to do with vegetarianism, because if you eat an animal, it's also reliant on plants, and plants are reliant on the sun, and so it goes on. So it's just the sun that is a life giver. It is the sun that or the photons of the sun, which are captured by photoelectric cells in the plant, and a photosynthesis takes place, giving a certain energy which is transferred to the consumer, namely you and me. And so we are running around on canned sunshine. We can't take any credit for it. We're all creatures of the solar God. This is what we understand when we repeat the Gayatri Mantra, a prayer to the sun, because it is the sun, or that which lights the sun, and all the attributes that we give to God, we give to the sun. It's a life giver. It knows every corner. Its rays embrace everywhere. It's beautiful, it's radiant, it's energetic, and so on. So, how can we now change our direction in such a way and get out of this biologically sustained thing? Because evolution is an unfolding, and if we are to get to the original condition, we might term this devolution. We might term this getting back to the original progressively. And of course, this is contained in all the scriptures. We see it in the Katha Upanishad, for example, where we have this order of complexity, if you will, this order of subtlety and order of grossness. And we see it more illustrated as layers or sheaths in the Taittiriya Upanishad, Panchakosha, 5 sheaths. So let us see, using that analogy, we can go from a physical awareness and we can retreat from the physical awareness back to a mental awareness or even a energetic awareness, what we might call a morphological body. And we can retreat from there to a mental body. And we retreat there from a position of the intellect, buddhi, and we can retreat there. From there, we can retreat into a potentiality, and we can there retreat into an area of bliss, and we can retreat then, you see, and we go back to our source. Now, some of this happens in our daily life because we block off our waking state when we fall asleep, and we enter into a whole new world where even if my leg gets chopped off in the waking state, I am playing football in a dream. How is it that the leg was repaired in the dream? Or how is it that a fully legged person got over the border and got a reincarnated leg and played football happily? And then even that scene shifts along, and I retreat into an area of sheer bliss and peace, whose characteristic is there is no second thing. There are no two. And so that state is the nearest, what we call deep sleep. That's the human way of putting it. But we're putting it from the waking state's point of view. You can easily change the terminology and the understanding and saying it is resting in God's lap. It is entering into the essence of the nurturing deity. There where we sleep blissfully until that mother wakes us up in the morning and says, come on, get up, play this role again, put on your waking clothing and your outer clothing associated with your role, and go about your business. So you see, these scriptures are very practical and helpful and useful in assisting us to look at things in a very different way. So most people will be inclined toward these 2 genetic directives, namely perpetuation of the species on the one hand, and streaming negative entropy toward oneself to sustain our life. And do we have any examples of anybody who has transcended these directives? Well, Ramakrishna himself is such an example. And we have Jesus and Buddha and so on and so forth, who in evolutionary terms were magnificent failures because they transcended these 2 directives. And these directives are psychological directives. And the psychological directive is able to withdraw from the physical and the needs of the physical, and make this regression, as it were, this useful positive regression, this devolution, the going back to the original nature. Now we have some useful diagrams for this process. The Sri Yantra is a useful diagram that illustrates this. A whole complex of entangled triangles. where we can look at that and see, okay, so we can go through this complexity like a labyrinth, this like a maze, and go back to the origin. And the concept of a labyrinth is something that we find across religious cultures. We find it in Eastern cultures as a mandala. We find it in other aspects. For example, there's a very famous labyrinth on the floor, beautifully mathematically calculated, of a church in France whose aisle is the widest in the world, probably, in terms of churches. And there is a labyrinth there on the floor, and it's a massive one. And people, as a spiritual exercise, will go to this labyrinth and will go through, and it's designed to take you in and away until finally you go to the center. And you'll find mandiras in South India and other places illustrative of this, a pilgrim journey. So you go into the gopuram, the gate of the temple, and you'll make a perambulation clockwise. And you've gone from the outer body, as it were, symbolically, and you're going inward to every single subtle layer until finally you come to the garbha, the womb of the whole corpus, in the very center where the deity resides. And so, for this reason, the mandir comes from the same root, manasa, mind. It's a meditation. Now, if we take all of this as a meditation, then it's a very, very useful thing. If we just do it in a meaningless way, well, it has a certain value, but not really the value intended by those who construct these things as useful techniques to go inward. The truth is found inward. And so the closer we get to that truth, the more we come away from the external biological factors that we're involved in. And then the way we deal with problems is not from an individual struggling against people and places and events on the other side, but a revaluation of things as wave systems. And that is why we have in the Sankhya system that is adopted everywhere, this idea of 24 cosmic principles. And Sri Ramakrishna refers to these many, many times. So what is nature? Nature, for convenience, can be put into 24 categories. What are these categories? Well, the obvious one is what I've mentioned. The small world of the senses, we can say. The waking world of the body. 10 senses are mentioned there. So these are 5 senses where we gather information, most of it from the external skin. When I say external skin, the eyes are on the skin, the ears are on the skin. They're not internal to that. And so these senses are there, and the queen bee of it is the mind. So now we have 11 factors. Now, what are they related to? Well, they have to be related to 5 objects. You can't have senses in a meaningful way, gathering information. You have the information about what? And then 5 organs of reaction, karmendriyas, where we react. So we have these 11 factors because the mind is there, the queen bee of all of this. And within that, the real indriyas, the real senses, are operating as a component of the mind. And 5 objects. Now you have 16 factors there, majority of it. But where do these come from? All of these are condensed variations, manifested variations of 5 waves and wave systems, all interacting and compounding in an order of grossness. Unfortunately and unhelpfully translated as literally, earth, etc. So Prithivi, earth. You can't make a literal translation, it's a symbolic translation. It means all things which are solid. It means that things are a little less subtle, and there is a final combination of all the other four subtle elements. But these are not the elements that can be literally seen. These are subtle, subtle elements that cross the border, as it were, because we see the world not as microscopic things, we see it as major things. Now, there's a quandary in modern science and physics. The quandary says, how is it that we see tables and chairs and people? How is it that we see this, and yet we know that they're actually mostly empty space, and in between the space, somehow making a cohesion of it, beyond molecules, would be atoms, unseen. And the atoms are not yet fundamental, even though that's the meaning in Greek of the atoms, that's what it means. And Vaisheshika philosophy follows the same kind of atomic theory, but there are more fundamental things. And these fundamental things we call these subtle elements, otherwise known as tanmatras. Mahabhutas is their final product, the senses, in the world of the senses. But these subtle elements we can call tanmatras. We can put it into a poetic form. These tanmatras are angels preparing the way, because from this philosophical point of view, you cannot say that the cause is different from the effect. Where are the waves coming from? Now we can use an analogy of the ocean. There are many, many waves in the ocean, but there's only one ocean. And you can't say there's an ocean and separate to that are the waves. You can't say that there's a creator and separate to that is creation. That would present a problem for you. And so where are all these waves coming from in compounded forms of subtlety, where Prithivi is coming from, a combined manifestation of apas or water, api, and then that is coming from Agni, from fire, or Tejas, the thing that shines and radiates, and that is coming from Vayu, the thing that is so subtle and vast everywhere, and that is coming from Akasha, which is essentially potential subtle matter. And that is acted on by prana, and all these variations come as a result. Prana, energy, universal energy, and no scientist can tell you what is energy yet. They'll say energy, they'll describe it by its tanmatra or its effect. Where is it coming from? It's coming from one cosmic mind. And this cosmic mind is the manifested movement of prakriti, nature in its potentiality. And that can be in a manifested condition or unmanifested condition. And where is that coming from? That's coming from a final absolute causation or causal factor, where the causal factor is both the material and the efficient cause. You can't make a separation. You can only say there's one existence. And when you introduce limiting faculties or limiting adjuncts, then you get all these other things. Now, we've just done a meditation. We've gone from the grossest thing that you can think of and traced ourselves inward, to the more subtle, the more immense, the more truthful, until you come to a position you can no longer go beyond. You have transcended all these other things. And same thing when you transcend lust and greed. These are the two references. That is, women in gold described like that as a catchphrase, or men in gold. When you're transcending these things, what you're doing is really you're going inward. You're seeing more value inside and less value outside. And the more you go inward, the more is revealed, the less significance the world has, what we describe as the world. And so we do this through spiritual practice. We do this by understanding the nature of nature itself in its threefold way as the illuminating factor full of purity and love and truth, the active element of rajas and the dormant aspect of tamas. And when we notice carefully, because we're independent observers, what is going on in the psychological field, in the mind, then we consciously assert the higher value and we play a game like this. This is the source of all ethical values. Without understanding this, there's absolutely no reason for there to be any ethical values at all. So where do these moral and ethical values come from? They come from an inner need to transcend these two principal directives, which are all to do with survival, perpetuating the human condition in such a way that we are trapped, as it were, in a net of misunderstanding. We are living in a mistake. And the mistake is our own true nature is full and free and perfect. It is divine. And our assumption is, I am so-and-so, a sophisticated version of every other biological species. And as long as we make that mistake, we're trapped in a cycle, something like a Ferris wheel, if you will, where you don't know how to get off. How do I get out of this? I'm tired of this. How do I get out of it? And every time I ask, how do I get out of it? I go round again, perpetually. And even though I think I'm getting out of it, I'm getting on another wheel, and so it goes on. We call this transmigration or reincarnation, whatever it is. So this is why we have to transcend principally these directives. We do it by filling up with glory and beauty and goodness and love, all these wonderful high values, with the help of scriptural direction and the help of a teacher, and going through this very carefully with a kind of attitude that sees things as a sport, a sporting, adventurous attitude. Anything short of that will be another negative. What we are doing in simple terms is we are overcoming negatives which do us harm by filling up with the positives which do us good and serve to neutralize the negatives. And we're doing it at every kind of opportunity we can. And so that is why the fundamental course that we give here is dealing with personality development. It's saying, okay, let's find out. We acknowledge that all identities, which we call egos, are not standard. They're all varied and individual and affected by environmental impacts, as well as genetic impacts carried forward. General sense of ignorance, but that is followed by a sense of individuality, which we call egoism. Patanjali in his Yoga Sutras very carefully and succinctly mentions these various 5 kleshas or obstacles. We start off with avidya, ignorance. We've made a mistake in our understanding and interpretation of the world. And then how do we perpetuate that? It gives us the illusion of an individuality. And then it gives us the effort of preserving that individuality through going through these oscillations between pain and pleasure, attraction and repulsion. We move away from things we fear and we move toward things that we feel will give us pleasure. This is called desire. Desire, I feel that life is not fulfilled. I have to go and fulfill my life. I have to search for the meaning of life. And I have to fill up with whatever I can, even though I haven't learned the lesson that what I'm filling up with could be toxic to me eventually, and perpetuate the darkness of this ignorance and move me away from my pristine divine nature. So transcending these two directives is not only a fact of spiritual life and development, but it's also the method. It's a methodology. It says, shift your position away from this individual biological identity and transcend it. Transcend it how? Transcend it because our own true nature is already transcendent. These are just convenience terms when we use this immanence and transcendence and so on. We are already that. The thing that we are seeking is already with us. It is already there. It is our intrinsic fundamental nature. When we look at it as an external thing, we call it God. And that creates a sense of remoteness. And then as we associate more and more through prayer, spiritual practice, meditation, directions of the Guru, directions according to the scriptural manual presented to us, and reform the mind into something that is completely truthful and selfless, that sense of selflessness will be a transcendental condition, a transcendent condition over and above lust and greed, or in other words, this attachment to the directive of the propagation of the species on the one hand, and the need to emphasize the sophisticated world of pleasure on the other side, where we feel not only should we survive, but thrive. And it's all because there's a misunderstanding about where true happiness lies, where the true source of bliss is. We have a blissful base, and we need to resort to it not only frequently, but align to it in such a way that it is a perpetual condition. And so this is really what is meant by this phrase. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, Swamiji. Thank you.
I have a habit of going around many, many different avenues until, we get to the answer. But you see, every question, every answer has a significant background to it. And it's presented like a labyrinth to us. Life is presented to us like a labyrinth, something where we don't exactly know the way in, we don't exactly know the way out. There's that famous phrase, you see, where somebody in a shop or a supermarket, an old lady, let's say, asks, can you help me out? And the manager says, yes, certainly. Which way did you come in? So we're all a bit like that. We're in a state of confusion. We don't think we're confused, but we've made a wrong analysis, a wrong reading, and that is deliberate. It's deliberate because without that misunderstanding, the whole of life comes to a standstill. If all activity in the universe ceases without understanding its purpose, then, or if it understands its purpose, the other way around actually, then the whole thing comes to a standstill. The dream goes. Now, this overall is called Maya, of course, and there's the famous illustration contained in the Bhagavatam there. So sometimes it's termed Krishna, sometimes it's Vishnu in the stories. Anyway, let's put it as, doesn't matter which. But Narada and him are going through the desert. And let's say Vishnu stops and says to his most sincere, most ardent devotee, "Oh, Narada, I'm very parched. I'm thirsty. We've been walking long distances. And you have asked me one question. Amidst all this dryness, I can hardly answer." I'm elaborating the story somewhat. I can hardly answer because my throat is so parched. Your question was, what is Maya? So please go off in this direction. There's probably a village or something like that, and fetch me some water. And Narada goes off and he finds a village and he sees many doors are closed, knocks on the door, no answer. Finally, he knocks on a door and a beautiful woman opens the door. And instantly, Narada falls in love. He's there to ask for some water. 2 cups of water, one for himself, one for Vishnu. And so he, falls in love immediately. He forgets about the thirst and his mission, asks the father for, the phrase is, may I have your daughter's hand in marriage? I don't know about the rest of her, but at least the hand. And anyway, they get married, they have children, grandchildren, and so on and so forth. They have a farm, they have a big estate, a house, and what have you. But one day, this immense flood comes along. The weather turns very, very dangerously turbulent. And the whole of his family and the whole of his property gets swept away in this flood that is created. The wife disappears, engulfed in something like a tsunami. Children are gone, house is gone, wealth is gone, property is gone. Objects of husbandry have gone, such as cattle and so on, all gone. And then all of a sudden, Narada is grieving so badly, and he hears himself sobbing, and there he opens his eyes, and there he sees Vishnu sitting there asking, so this last few minutes, these last 5 minutes, what happened to you and where's my water? So this is Maya. The details of the story may vary, of course, but that's the purport of it. So time is irrelevant in most circumstances. We don't understand time and the nature of time, but usefully we register this thing called time because it gives us the opportunity to insert something voluntarily of our own that is designed to uplift the mind and get us out of a future fearful and stressful condition, and takes us out of the past where we may have regret and guilt and so on and doubt, and puts us in this present moment where right now we can engage and experience the infinite invisible. And as soon as we do that, even for a moment, all these other things go. And it is that moment where we open our eyes, as it were, and get the vision at that particular moment, even if it's for a split second. We have now discovered our own true divine nature. Doing that systematically, as much as we possibly can, second after second, minute after minute, hour after hour, day after day, month after month, year after year, we will automatically transcend these 2 directives, which have been called, let's say, lust and greed. There's a famous question, you see, do you live to eat or eat to live? And if you are eating to live, that's good. And if you're living to eat, then this is called, you see, gold, if you will. This is called your attachment to streaming negative entropy on yourself in order to survive. And then, of course, if you are unable to see the genderless aspect within an individual, the Atman has no gender. It's not male, it's not female. If you're able to access that, then all your lust will go. And if for devotees, if you invest your feeling, your emotional feeling of love toward God, in whatever form you choose, and you do this, loving the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your strength, says the book of Deuteronomy, the first of many directives, that being the most important according to Jesus. If you do that, then what will happen? You will eclipse every other love. You'll exchange all your small loves for this one eternal infinite love. And that really is the final formula for most people. Loving. Love is the highest virtue, really. And love has no thought for reward or reciprocation, nothing like that. It is absolutely pure, flowing goodness without any sense of gain or reward. And when we feel that flowing toward us, we find, oh, this is divine grace flowing. And if we have a careful attunement to it, if we are watchful, we'll see that this flow of love is constantly flowing toward us infinitely, without a break. And we interpret it as breathing, we take it for granted. We interpret it as thinking, we take it for granted. We take it comes to us as renewal of cells, and we take it for granted. It comes to us as digestion, and we take it for granted. It comes to us as an environment, and we take it for granted. The sun rising in the morning, say, and we take it for granted. The beautiful moon, and we take it for granted. Even though you see a craft can land on it and a robot can walk about on it, still we have that. When you look into the sky, you can forget all that. It's the shining face of the divine eye looking at us. The passage tells us a different understanding of what the universe is, with one eye as the sun, one eye as the moon. Or look into the sky and we see a sacrificial horse spanning the whole sky, and so on. So we have to have a poetic eye in all of this and align ourselves to all this love and beauty flowing toward us. And when we see that love is flowing toward us, the source of this is lovable. It's very easy to love God. But we have to get away from some of the human understanding or interpretations of it. And we also have to understand that we are made in the image and likeness of that being. And the whole universe, according to the Purusha Suktam, is actually this cosmic person. When we look at the universe, that's how we have to view it. That what happens on this small human scale happens everywhere. Now, this is a lesson really that has to be understood by modern science too, because what they're investigating in, say, cosmology and physics is just a universal person. And that universal person is what we call God. It's remarkable that people don't see that, because you see, if you have, I think I mentioned yesterday, the ex-president of the United States of America, Ronald Reagan, and it wasn't true that he dyed his hair. It was just naturally orange. I'm joking. But anyway, he had a great sense of humor. And he said, I feel sometimes like inviting all my atheist friends to a grand banquet in the White House. And then once they have finished their wonderfully beautiful, filling, and exotic meal, ask them whether they believe there was a chef that made it in the kitchen. And so where we find the evidence for this loving God is when we look all around. Of course, you may argue, but you see there is human suffering. And the question of suffering is an important theological question, which is difficult if you have an attitude there's a creator and a creation separate. It's easy when you say it's only one thing, God's body, and mortality is inserted into it also. And suffering is there in a threefold way. One is you caused it yourself. This is an inevitable causal law that we call karma, because every thought, every action has its consequence on us and on our environment. Or secondly, it can be caused by somebody else's egoistic actions, the cruelty to me. And then there is just nature is rough. Nature is full of good and full of bad in our interpretation and understanding. It's full of light and shade. Its nature is rough. Prakriti means something that is unrefined. And if it was refined, nothing would move. If it was perfect, there'd be no activity. And so, fortunately, we have the capacity to transform all the negative, so-called, all the difficulties into something that is useful and good. Water can be dangerous. Water can be whipped up into a frenzy in a large lake. Yet we can harness it by putting a dam wall there and generating hydroelectricity. So we have the capacity to transform discord into harmony, and that is the human job. No other being can do it. So because we have the intelligence to do it and the equipment to do it, we can transform all the discord into harmony. That should be our main functional operation. What is your job? I'm a transformer. What do you transform? I take all the discord and manufacture harmony from it. Like a manufacturing plant that gets delivery of raw materials, a manufacturing process, and comes out in a fine way. And if you say gold, for example, it was mentioned, well, it doesn't come as a refined bar in the first place. It comes from rough rock in the ground, which is then taken, broken up, crushed, ground, water added, a process of separation, because gold itself, gold grains, have a very heavy specific gravity. You can easily take advantage of that. And then it comes out as a collective thing. And then you smelt it, get rid of all the dross, and there you find shining gold. When you looked at the rock, you couldn't suspect there was such a thing in it. So we're all like that. Make a transformation in your life. Well, I think we exceeded our time a little bit. So, thank you.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.